Here's Paul Brody. Welcome to my feature, Most Wanted Poets, Escaping the Alabama Prison System.
The gavel, the splintered body, the redneck guards, the state dungarees, the gray cinder block, the naked shower, the elemental fear, the unspoken yoke, the trembling hands, the walk to chow, the razor fence, the Rottweiler's teeth, the hesitation, the guttural pain, the calls refused, the return to sender, the rivulet of tears, the frozen heart, the opaque night, the seclusion, the muffled scream, the masturbation, the silence.
It's 5:30 in the morning, spring in Alabama. I'm sitting on the porch of a big white house waiting to be picked up. I down coffee to overcome jet lag, my stomach cramps. I have mixed feelings about this visit. While growing up in America, TV and school history class has burnt the phrase land of the free into my consciousness. For the past 20 years, I've worked as a trumpeter and writer in Berlin, Germany. And while finding inspiration in my adopted home, I rediscover my own country anew. In America, over 2.2 million people live behind bars. Though we say we're the land of the free, the U.S. has a greater percentage of its population locked up than almost any other country in the world. As a writer and musician, I wonder what it's like for one of these millions to be creative, to write a story or draw a picture, to exercise a bit of freedom within the borders of the mind. I chose to visit poet and artist prisoners in Alabama because it's most known for its flawed justice system. Alabama incarcerates more people per capita than almost any other state. Its prisons are filled to almost twice their capacity, spurring violence. At the same time, the Cotton State is initiating one of the most exemplary prison and arts education programs in the country, thanks to Kyes Stevens, whose car is pulling up in the driveway.
Yeah, I spent about 10 minutes on Highway 280 this morning trying to catch a dog.
On the way here?
Yeah.
What was it?
It was on the side of the road and obviously somebody's pet and obviously old. But I was trying to catch him.
Oh.
So I just kind of backed off and worked really hard to try to get the people to slow down and let him cross. I mean, it's a
We're headed for the Elmore Correctional Facility to listen to Kyes Stevens' poetry workshop. I brought along my trumpet as a way to connect with the poets in a music-word dialogue. Elmore Prison is about 2 hours from Auburn University, which houses the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project. Kyes Stevens founded the program in 2003 as the sole teacher and expanded it to 173 courses from engineering to philosophy. Along with professors from the university, the program attracts students from all over the world who are interested in teaching in prisons. While barreling down a narrow road through Tallapoosa County, Miss Stevens tells me how she sees the land where she grew up in relation to its justice system.
So one of the things I tell people when we're driving around rural Alabama or anywhere in Alabama is everywhere you see right now was in cotton. And that means everywhere you see right now has been touched by slavery. And that context should not ever go away. You know, I think about it with my family land, right? It's like slaves probably built this. I think it is important to acknowledge that when you consider the situation of the justice system right now, because there's definite correlations.
After the Civil War, the justice system proved the most effective tool to disenfranchise and enslave minorities. Laws were created to allow police to imprison at a whim. Life as a prisoner slave was worse than before abolition.
So what happened, the relationship to the justice system is that if there was a black man walking along the street in, let's say, Tallapoosa County, then I just go to the cop and say, this person looked at me funny, right? And if as a white woman, right, if I make this assertion, there's a fairly reasonable chance that he's going to be arrested, and he's probably going to be put into what is called the convict labor system. And this is where businesses would rent convicts from cities and counties to do manual labor work, agricultural work, road work, lots of work in the coal mines, and they were treated horrifically. The system of slavery is horrific, but the economics of that system meant that if someone had purchased slaves, then they made the necessary economic investment into maintaining that life because there was an economic investment into a work outcome, right? All that went out the window with the convict labor system.
Kyes becomes quiet. Instead of another farmhouse, the Elmore Correctional Facility appears through the morning fog. The average time for an Elmore prisoner is 20 years. Recent news articles have reported a fatal stabbing and 240 prisoners on a work strike. Miss Stevens tells me no wallets are allowed in prison and to tuck mine under the seat.
Have you been in a prison before?
Never.
Okay. So by the end of your time on this trip, you are going to have a certain sadness that sits inside of you about prisons, and it will not ever leave, right? Because you're going to go meet with my students for 3 days, and in those 3 days, you're going to form a connection with them because they are incredibly likable people and very engaged, and they're memorable, and that's going to sit in you. Well, you know, multiply that times 10 facilities a semester all over the state times 15 years, right?
Well, to give you a little bit about myself, my name is Randall Horton. Currently stay in Harlem, New York. But I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, the Bible Belt of the South, as they say. Very early on, I had to be introduced to race, in which ways probably a child shouldn't have to be.
At the beginning of this feature, we heard Randall Horton read his poem, The Gavel. He'll be speaking to us throughout our travels in Alabama. He spent most of the 1990s in prison, where he first took a poetry class. Today, he's the author of several books and professor at the University of New Haven.
Put in a nutshell, I was doing anything to sort of make money. I had, long ago turned my back on society and started selling drugs and became a smuggler, and I ended up getting caught back up in an FBI sting operation. Stolen laptops and stolen computer products and things of that nature. I actually received a 5-year sentence for that. I blame it all on drugs.
Before entering the front building, Kyes signals that I need to turn off my recorder. Inside, 2 officers sit in front of an airport-like security system. We're told to lay our belongings on a worn Formica table for inspection. I notice a fishnet bag of books on the table of mice and men, and their eyes were watching God poking through. The door to the bathroom swings open. A man, more smile than face, tall enough to step across the room in one step, plops down a bundle of white prison uniform, signs a paper at the desk, and seems oblivious to the officer commanding him, "You behave yourself now." Kyes and I stare through the window while the man leaves, the dust and cobwebs blurring the image of the woman in front of her pickup truck standing open-armed.
This is Paul. Paul's from Germany, but he's not originally from Germany.
7 prisoners nod hello while setting up the tables and name tags. The men represent the ethnic population of the prison. 4 are black, 2 are white, and 1 is Hispanic. While chatting with the students, I'm struck by how words feel differently in prison. References to internet, travel, food, personal choice all seem grossly decadent in this setting. Kyes warms up her class with a simple writing exercise. She gives her students the beginning of a sentence to complete by writing a chain of comparisons. My brother's car smells like...
My brother's car smelled like yesterday's garbage. Like a bag of corn chips. Awful. Like a morgue. A football team locker room. a rotten vegetable, like the end of life, the trail to hell, like chitlins not prepared.
Oh my God. Can we all get a sense of what this smells like? All right, Paul.
My brother's car smelled like old dirty clothes and spoiled food and shoes that ran a mile.
What's the most specific detail?
Old food.
Ran a mile.
The shoes that ran a mile, right? Okay, so that is pointing to something very, very specific. And so what happens is you giving your description and you giving your description, all of you, you're triggering memories in other people. And that's one of the many amazing things about writing. That's how you make human connections, because you're saying, I've had this experience in my life, I've had this memory in my life, and I know that this is going to trigger something in you.
Before the students talk about writing poetry, Kyes discusses a bit of the required reading, Peter Heller's post-apocalyptic novel, Dog Stars. It's a story about two men struggling to survive in a landscape full of disease and thugs, a climate Miss Stevens feels not foreign to her students. While discussing how the main character enters his burning house to save his poems rather than the pictures of his dead wife, the class gets excited. Kyes asks, what does it mean to save the poems?
When he brings up Melissa, it gets real sensitive, you know what I'm saying?
He risked his life probably to go back.
He totally risked his
You know what
life
I'm saying? So
for poetry and
Yes.
soda pop.
I felt like Melissa was gone and the poems are there.
Okay, so what you have just said is what I would say the most beautiful commentary that you can possibly make about why the hell write a poem. We lose things all the time, right? And what remains are memories and what we write about them, right? That here is this human being who needs more than a photograph of his dead wife, poetry.
It's a poem of somebody that's not home, that yearns to be where he calls home.
Very intense questions. What is home?
Home is behind a rifle.
Okay, so part of what we're saying is that the concept of home is tied to an idea of comfort, of familiarity.
During the discussion, I sense an undercurrent of meaning I've never experienced before in a writing class. Concepts of masculinity, loss, home, memory have a feeling of urgency in this environment. The students take a break. One of the prisoners, Andrew, approaches me to describe a different reality than laughter and poetry, speaking to me as if giving me something to smuggle out.
Prison is a cross-cultural, social, anthropological petri dish. It's a mix in a controlled environment. This is a prey-predator environment. This is a violent environment. This is a drug-infested environment. This is an infectious disease environment. This is an overcrowded environment. This is a anti-intellectual environment. This is a gang environment. There's racism. That's what prison is.
Only 4 students come back after the break: Karan, Henry, Taurus, and Andrew. I glance around the chapel they use as a multi-purpose room. The walls are lined with children's paintings of Jesus. 2 guards in a corner with radios blasting oversee a group of prisoners stacking chairs. The students don't seem to be distracted by the racket. I ask, what does writing poetry mean to you while living in these harsh conditions?
We have a lot of issues dealing with like family and real life issues, like dealing with loss and dealing with grief, and learning how to describe the grief. What does grief look like? And me seeing that and trying to see it and explain it gives me the vocabulary to actually explain what's going on with me and dealing with issues in my very life by being in prison myself. So I can re-identify with society and what society, you know what I'm saying, wants from me. You know what I'm saying?
Do you have a poem?
I like this one. No, I like this one. It's called In the Mirror. And it's very reflective. And it goes, I look in the mirror and I view my physical presence, taking in myself from the world's perspective of who I am, but what I really am is not seen, for it is bound inside of this physical presence. I wonder would there ever be a mirror to reflect to the world from the perspective of how I view myself, of how I see myself, then the world can see me as I now only know myself. We as people spend hours in the mirror making up the person we want the world to see, never find the confidence of what's in the mirror, because what's in the mirror we know is make-believe, but the person we are, we hate to see, because the very individual that we need to be, the only way we can see if we see ourselves in the mirror like we ought to be. In the mirror.
A clap
Yeah.
in my heart. Thank you. Wow.
It's just some things that I reflect on, just dealing with, how the world sees me and what I want people to think of me. Being a felon and being in this position.
When did you write that?
I wrote that a couple years ago, right as I lost my grandmother. Oh. Especially being a man, we don't talk to people like, I got this going on. We like to hold it in. And the only way you really can deal with it is if I could write it down.
I talked to you for a minute. Coming out here to this class, I told someone yesterday when I got back to the dorm that it felt like I was coming from the outside, out in society, back, to prison. It's like an escape. I've never been a poet, but now, my mind is opening up to it. Like I wrote a poem about my grandmother, feelings and stuff like that. So.
You got that poem for us here?
It's his decision on whether he wants to.
Oh, I'm sorry, no. Okay.
I'll read it for you.
It's all cool.
Title was Nanny and I on a Summer Day. A tiny ball of cotton floats over her garden, pulling me like a John Deere. A plastic bucket holds her trophies. Rubber boots make a fashion statement. Eyes shine like stars. Pole beans snap easy. God bless the pea sheller. Mason jar holds plum Nelly. Cotton top says, cows laying down. Cows don't know. Blue worms are magic. Red-winged blackbird sings to a cat's tail. Snake doctor on my last eye. Through the head, into the fat body, toothpick through the eye. Cows laying down. Cotton top believes that stuff. Blue worms are magic. They hang around the brush. I hang in the brush. Rats make a nest in my reel. Cows laying down laughing. Stupid cows don't know. See, there he is now. Fight like a champ, walking on water. No spitting, please. A nylon string holds my trophies. Blue worm magic. Stand up, dumb cow. Cotton top dancing. Electric knife boogie. Eyes shine like stars. Our plates hold our trophies. Taste buds happy, laughing. Her eyes shine like stars. I have pictures of her. They were always just bright, shining, especially when she's happy. And especially, if I'd bring in a mess of fish, she just, that would just make her day.
Thank you.
When you take that bus from county jail to whatever place in the mountains, because it's always in the mountains, usually somewhere they got you, you can smell the agriculture. After all that first night, you're going through intake, you've been assigned a cell. First thing that comes to your mind, how am I going to do this time? How am I going to make it all these years? You can't really think about nothing but the time. And so the time begins to eat you up. You wrestling with your own demons in your own mind, trying to come to grips with how you're going to get back to some kind of sanity, right?
I began writing once attending these classes, and so I've come a long way. I was able to get something published at one time from the Michigan University Press in a book entitled 4 City Essays from America's Prisons in February of 2014. I had an article in there that was entitled Mass Producing Mentally Ill Citizens in America's Prisons. I want to read just one paragraph, if I may. And this alludes to what Quran had talked about when he said in his poem what we ought to be. Humans are highly adaptable to extremes of both negative and positive environments. This adaptability is first and foremost seated in the mind. The mind defines who the person is, and every thought of the mind is reducible to the neuronal cell unit. That is, the mind is the brain and is made up of approximately 100 billion neurons. The adaptability of the brain is referred to as plasticity. When the brain changes, the individual is changed. So one of my greatest fears of being in prison is the adaptability which I might become in response to this environment. To put it more bluntly, I'm afraid of becoming a monster because of having been here for over a decade. That scares me. And as I get older, I feel that I might become more susceptible to that, understanding the stress upon me and the degree of which dementia may set in older age. The poetry gives me something to strive for.
You had asked what this program means to us, right? In the creative mind. I've been locked up so long. I'm loved but forgotten. When I started really diving into me as a person, and I wrote my mom a Mother's Day poem. She told me, she said, I can't believe that you felt like that. And throughout the whole poem, I cried.
Take a break for just a second. They may have to go.
So you have to go somewhere, or we
Go back to the door because they can't clear the count. It's on their rack where everybody's 1, 2, 3 right in a row.
You have to go to your bed assignment so they can count you like, eggs in the carton.
Well, I hope I seen it. Second.
15 minutes to an hour. So
I'm here for you guys all the way from Germany.
I hope you will advocate to keep your time that you were ensured that you would have, and we certainly want.
The poets go back to their bunks to be counted. We wait for over an hour. Kyes looks impatient, packs her books. I mumble, I came all the way from Berlin to talk with these guys. She nods and sits. 3 poets come back looking distressed. We never learn whether it's a miscount or if somebody escaped. Henry and Andrew click into discussion mode, recalling childhood experiences that blocked learning. Although they're from seemingly opposite backgrounds, Henry is white and from the countryside, Karan is black and from inner city Birmingham, they talk similarly about education and social structure in their youth. Learning poetry has helped them to gain the tools to reinvent themselves. The mysterious undercurrent of meaning that I felt during the class reveals itself.
What we consider education to be is getting knowledge. A lot of them don't know. It's like coming from the culture that I come from, the background that we come from. People are not, it's not popular to be the smartest guy in the class.
Where does that come from, right? Because I would agree that part of it is absolutely cultural, right? But if you are talking about making a cultural shift,
you have identity with things. Like when you come from our community that we come from in the inner city Birmingham, we don't have wrestling teams, we don't have debate teams like you see on TV. We don't know about poetry in itself, so that's why we don't understand it. We never been told our ideas are worth anything. So a lot of people say, you're gonna write your ideas down. Well, write down for, I don't know nobody that's a male that come from my neighborhood that graduated high school. None of us. Before I even graduated 9th grade, I was in prison.
Taurus returns to class a few minutes before we're finished. I take out my trumpet to see if he wants to try a music and word performance.
I'm not a type of person that usually expresses himself in front of a lot of people, you know what I'm saying?
want us to leave?
No.
Okay.
Let's do this. I'll leave you space, you leave me space. I'll play and then you just write on top of the note. 1 word, 1 note. 1 word until it needs 2 words or 2 notes.
Oh, so you...
Let it grow slowly.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
In the depths of my stomach, where the pain prays and shocks, you left me like it was nothing. Now the shame, it never stops. Mug me, smear me while humming. Lonely tear, my heart just rots. The ugly fear keeps coming. Now the doors are always locked. But your beauty was stunning, and your lips, they got me high. I was higher than a comet with an angel in the sky. Search the trees, scan the seas, burning down to 3rd degrees. My destiny ran from me. Now I'm praying on my knees. Using me, but I was using you. Puppets acting dumb. What did I do to you? The usual. Nothing. Actions numb. I wonder what it all means. Pinch myself, am I still asleep? Under a spell of a queen, and my slumber plunders me. Thank you.
Let's hear what Professor Randall Horton says about his early experiences of writing poetry in prison.
Prison forced me to become a writer because that was the only way to deal with what I like to call the silence in your head. You know, when it's all left to you in your cell by yourself and you get to thinking, sometimes that thinking becomes so loud that it's so much that you got to do something with it. So writing became that way of expressing those thoughts. So you start trying to reevaluate your life because, you know, all of your freedoms have been taken from you. The end product is you sit in a cell. And so for me, the idea of language and words and reading and became ways in which I could work out the things that were going on in my head.
Before I leave Elmore Prison, Andrew approaches me to say goodbye.
You know, in over a decade, I've not had visits. I don't have family or friends that come. I'm not from here, from Alabama. There's nothing familiar to me. And so I anticipated this. I was waiting and waiting and waiting, you know, for Wednesday morning to come. I could not wait to see a near and dear friend closer to me than a brother. And that was you. That was you. Because you, no way, would have done what you did and arrived here and be here with us now were you not dearly concerned about my well-being. And I know that for a fact. And that makes us brothers in heart and mind. And I just love it, man. I mean, I'm happy. That's great. You know, and if I don't get anything else out of it, I saw a near dear friend. You know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. When we ride up home to, they'll see what you and I can do now. Gonna ride up home to, when we send it away, nothing to do. The Elmore facility parking lot opens up to a field with a compost mountain about a half a mile away. A tractor driven by a smiling prisoner heads to the compost. Those on work patrol are allowed this little bit of freedom. Although we're going to Kyes' house to have lunch and visit her 13 cats, 2 dogs, and a donkey, Kyes is already emailing to organize other parts of her prison program.
Sorry, I have to do one more. I've got.
No, totally take your time. I'm discombobulated.
Well, they don't like it when we loiter in the parking lot. So let me get to another location and we will regroup. If you're loitering in the parking lot, it suggests that you're doing something that you shouldn't be.
Got it.
I am so happy with Henry's breakthrough on his poem today that I could just about freaking pop. So here's this guy, right? Here's this guy who signs up for a class because he is absolutely desperate to have an opportunity to just think differently, right? And to be into a different place. And he gets me as his poetry teacher. Poetry to me is about seeing first. Seeing first, then paying attention to language, and then coming back and working on, are we going to push this into a form or something like that, right? It is first and foremost the way of living. And if you are somebody who spends a lot of time in nature, you are already a poet. He didn't recognize it in himself. He did today.
While he was reading this tender poem about, you know, his grandma, the officer's radio in the background, just...
That's the sound of prison, and that's the sound of trying to survive in prison. The human need to write a poem, to make a piece of art, is so fundamental and so important to our existence on this planet that they can, through every awful circumstance of the prison, they can still do it.
When you started the program, did you realize it would take up like your whole life?
I don't know when I began that I fully realized that I would be pouring everything into this, but it's come to that. Well, that and cats. And I laugh all the time. People ask me, why do you have so many cats? And I was like, because I have a tough job. When a student leaves your class in the middle because they got transferred or they got released or this, that, and you don't know what happened to that student. You don't know what their life is like. And I do know what the lives are like for my island of misfit cats, right? Because they're with me, and that is that's a comfort.
And without you, you can pretty much assume
They would be dead.
Yeah.
All of them are rescued. Most of my cats are black. Black cats and dogs do not get rescued. They are discriminated against.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And a bunch of mine have little personality quirks that make them, not super adoptable to people, and so, but they're perfect.
Oh boy.
Okay, can everybody be nice?
So many little souls dashing around. That's a mystical furry blackness.
That's Ratchet, Eleanor Dolores Piglet. Here comes Henny Penny. Here's Sister, you're so pretty.
Oh my goodness. After Miss Stevens studied women's history and poetry at Sarah Lawrence, she moved back from New York to her childhood home of Waverly, Alabama, population 145. We meet her pets and have lunch from her garden-grown foods before driving to Montgomery, the capital of Alabama, to talk with Senator Ward.
We tend to oversimplify the criminal justice system sometimes. Bad, put them in a box and lock the door. Good, you walk out free. We like black and white. There's a cowboy, there's an Indian. When you get into the murky world where 80%'s gray, Americans don't like that as much. That's why we're real big on I call them bumper sticker slogans. One sentence explains the entire policy of criminal justice. It sells on votes, but it doesn't necessarily make good policy.
And going into that statement, the reasons why the justice system is what it is today as far as the problems?
I think some of our lawmaking and social engineering that we do as a country has sometimes created a discrepancy that's probably does impact one group over another. Good example being the sentencing guidelines, discrepancies between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. Crack cocaine's cheaper. You're demographically much poorer population, which tends to be African American, uses more crack cocaine than the powder cocaine. Powder cocaine tended to be more of a upper echelon, upper class drug. So what happened was you spent more time in jail for crack cocaine than you did for powder cocaine. Well, what happened is you had more people who were poor using crack cocaine, so disproportionately they got sentenced harder. And that's a very overly simplified one, but there are situations like that. I don't think there was ever anyone out there saying, let's go get the poor, let's go get this group.
Newsmax reported that 26% of Alabama is African American, but its prison population is 54%. The next day, we're in the car headed to Tutwiler Women's Prison.
The hills where coal and iron hide inside exhaustless mines. Strong-armed miners, sturdy farmers, loyal hearts, what if we be? Alabama, Alabama, we will lie be true to thee.
Running this program has made me be a much more patient and go with the flow person, because you have to be. 90% of what you do with a prison is beyond your control. You can set up your best laid plans. You can have the most consistent structure for classes. You could be working at that facility for 13 years, and you can go in one day and there's 2 new people there, and all of a sudden everything is brand new. They don't know who the hell you are. Why are you here? And, so you just have to be patient with that. You're going to have to bear with me.
A young dog, most likely from the sole house along this stretch of land, lays dead in the road.
I have to turn around. I'm going to have to move that. Sorry. No, I got it. I do this all the time.
Okay.
It's different to me when it's somebody's pet.
Yeah. Kyes puts on plastic gloves and steps out of the car.
We're in a curve, which is not good, so we got.
Kyes respectfully places the animal to rest under a tree. Oh, poor thing.
That's a puppy, and somebody thinks it can survive out here on this road. It can't. And I just can't deal with watching somebody's pet get run over and over and over, so.
Yeah. We're back in the car, headed for Tutwiler Women's Prison.
Sorry.
From thy prairies broad and fertile, where thy snow-white cotton shines, to the hills where coal and iron hide in thy exhaustless mines. Strong-armed miners, sturdy farmers, loyal hearts, whatever we be. Alabama, Alabama, we will lie, be true to thee.
Juliet Tutwiler has a women's prison named after her because in the early 1900s she established higher education for women in Alabama and advocated penal education, health care, and separate prisons for men and women. She died with the nickname Angel of Prisons. Oh, and by the way, the lyrics to the Alabama State song that we're hearing was written by her. Ironically enough, in 2013, Tutwiler Women's Prison was documented to be one of the worst prisons in America. Its Officer on Prisoner Abuse became a national scandal and a new warden was brought in. Over 100 years after Tutwiler lived, we're visiting the facility because an art class is allowed to paint a mural on a wall in the multipurpose room. Slow progress is better than none. Wow, I remember, months ago, I think we talked about this mural being made, and you said...
We have officers come in and tell us how great it looks. One woman came in the other day and told the ladies, she says, this just looks incredible. I went to the mountains in my dream last night. So yeah, that was just like this beautiful, moment of thankfulness.
In contrast to Elmore Prison, Tutwiler Women's Prison is an echo chamber. I sit in the front room of the prison waiting to talk with Warden Bobby Barrett. Each time the electric buzzer kicks and the metal door bangs against the massive lock, my back grows stiff. Finally, Warden Barrett stands in his office doorway pointing to me but looking at an officer. Has he had a shakedown? The officer signals that I stepped into the bathroom for a frisking. I forgot to leave my wallet under the car seat. Kyes looks at me flustered, holding her keys. Her eyes tell me I worked too damn hard to have these mess-ups. Warden Barrett is the new warden. With an upper torso in a bodybuilder V, a white shirt and yellow tie, he sits at his desk in front of a pile of paperwork telling me how he's responsible for everything from allocation of funds to prisoner safety, with an emphasis on preventing sexual abuse. I tell him that I've come all the way from Germany to visit Tutwiler Prison because of the mural being painted in the multipurpose room. He looks a little surprised.
Kai approached me about would I be in favor if they did a mural, and of course my first response was, well, let's, what kind of mural? Because certainly I didn't want anything that could be inflammatory or, could be a security risk, gang activity. I will say that it's almost an arm to the outside.
To the outside.
That they're being able to utilize some of their talents. It covers the whole wall, and you'll see it, that it's impressive.
Do you think about the risk bringing supplies in?
The security side of you think, okay, the wrong one get a hold of the paint, they could color the uniform, hit the fence, or escape.
Thank you very much. After the interview, Warden Barrett gives me permission to record walking through the facility. I start outside the front door, pass through the security gates, and go down the hall to the multipurpose room. The acoustics of prison tells its own story. I enter a room about half the size of a high school gym. A small number of art students are busy painting a pastoral scene in front of a crowd of fellow inmates. Stretching across the entire wall is a mountain range full of flowers and animals. Even the bathroom doors are camouflaged by a forest, except for 2 signs in the trees saying inmates and visitors. Kyes points with her paintbrush.
Right there, a student.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Paul.
Hi, Paul. Nice to meet you. I'm Lila.
This is a huge mountain range,
Isn't it awesome?
like the Alps or the Appalachians. What mountains are these?
Just mountains in our head, I guess. It's been great. It has been so much fun, and it's kind of therapeutic, and it's been a great learning experience. But we never realized the magnitude of this wall until we started it. We wanted to go all the way around the room.
You gonna do it?
No.
No? Okay.
No, absolutely not.
Another artist, about 65, introduces herself as Chainsaw. Recalling what the warden said about the possible security risk of a prisoner painting her uniform and escaping, I asked Chainsaw about using paint in prison.
No color here at all. The only color we see is on a nurse.
So what is it like? You got tables full of all these colors and stuff.
Well, let's just say that I have managed to put a lot of color on my clothes.
Is that like a subversive art?
Yeah, I guess so, because, I mean, I have a pair of pants that's got all this color on my clothes. And they're like, boy, you sure are messy when you paint. And I'm like, yep, I am. So I have purple and pink and green and all these colors on my clothes. So when I want to see color, I just wear that pair of pants.
Yeah. Faye stands on a ladder to the far right. She paints a lighthouse on one side of the mountain range, and on the other side, an arm protruding from the mountain holding a paintbrush, as if the mountain was painting itself.
I'm just not used to color. Those flowers have been a million different colors. The water has been a million different colors. I've been stuck in this corner, and it's changed and changed and changed. I want people to see what I feel.
You see that as something that moves in time, flowed through different colors, through different,
Right.
Tell me about what inspired you to change it.
Mountains are symbolic of strength.
Right.
And you have all this strength, and you have all this stability, and you have the flow, and you have everything. And I just wanted to say, you are able to create your own destiny. You are able to paint your own story. You know what I'm saying? So freedom is not about walking outside this prison. Freedom is about when you're outside of this prison, being free. You see what I'm saying? So it's like I tell people every day, just because you're ready to go don't mean you're ready to go. You have the time to go ahead and recreate yourself. It's more than just paint and colors. It's saying we're here, and we're mothers, and we're daughters, and we're wives, and we're sisters, but we're also artists. And don't forget about us, because we're here. We are here. It's like they threw us in a dungeon and threw away the key. Well, let's paint the walls of the dungeon, you know.
You have kids?
I have 4 boys.
How old are they, if I may ask?
23, 22, 13, and 11.
Wow, that's sweet. And then they must find that awesome.
Yeah.
Before leaving, Kyes wants to take a picture of the artist in front of the mural. The women pose, then gather around to look at the portrait.
I think we all look pretty spectacular.
I look like a serial killer in all my pictures.
Thank you. I'm very conscientious about having people come in and record our program, right? Because people, the general public, wants a soundbite for what it means to be in prison. And those are not sound bites to me. Those are my students. And the risk of our class, for any of our creative classes, is that when you are creating, when you are making art, when you are in a space that we create, it is very hard to ignore the things that you miss. It's very hard not to be aware of what you do not have, because in the creative process, your mind is thinking about everything. So the students who participate in our classes and the ones who persevere all the way through the end, I mean, it's an intense act for them. It's a full-on human investment. Here's a deer. You have to watch out for the deer on this road. They're bad. And, you know, why shouldn't we know somebody who's incarcerated? Why shouldn't we understand how they got to where they got, right?
I probably wouldn't have even been a poet if it hadn't been for sitting in the workshop and someone handed me the essential Etheridge Night and reading a poem as you lead me out loud. And then it was just something in the diction in their poem. Who is this person? Because, you know, I started flipping through it and I saw that this person had been in prison. He's writing about prison. And I was like, wow, there's someone else doing that?
What do prisoners gain from doing art in prison? Is there really a fundamental shift in their thinking, as Kyes Stevens says? Let's ask one of America's arts and prisons experts, University of San Francisco Public Administration's Professor Larry Brewster. It seems the research in America has long since established the benefits of arts in corrections.
In 1987, it's the only recidivism study that I know of in the United States based on arts programs. 74% of arts and corrections participants had clean records the first year after release, compared with only 49% for other parolees. What they also found, and this is quite noteworthy, is that the longer the ex-offenders were out of prison, the more likely that the arts and corrections participants would still be on good behavior compared with the average or non-arts and corrections participants. For instance, within 2 years of release, 58% of the non-arts and corrections participants were in trouble, compared with only 31% for the arts and corrections ex-cons. Historically, at least over the last 20 years, it's really been the public and politicians who argued for tough on crime laws and an emphasis on punishment over rehabilitation. We must recognize that public safety is best enhanced by creating opportunities for these men and women who paid back society for any crimes they may have committed.
Writing with a lens through prison has probably given me another type of humanity that others don't see, because, like I said before, if it's an invisible structure, no one's going to see it anyway. I could sit and talk a lot about some of the things I think that led me to prison in terms of society, but ultimately I have the place to blame on my shoulders. And so when I do that, I think it opens me up to another sort of humanity, because I acknowledge my own mistakes as a human, but I'm also willing to forgive myself. And so if I can do that, then I should be able to do the rest for others, right?
The St. Clair Correctional Facility on lockdown tonight. We're told an officer was stabbed while trying to break up a fight between two inmates.
A spokesperson for the Department of Corrections says investigators
So what's up? What's on the news?
So the news is that this morning an officer was stabbed at St. Clair Correctional, which is one of the facilities where we work, and it does have
overcrowded prisons.
a fairly regular track record of violence. So what that means is we might not be going to class tomorrow. And part of the reason for that is that the facility will be in lockdown. And there's all kinds
Before leaving Berlin for Alabama, Kyes warned me that any of our plans could change quickly. And they did. Instead of visiting the St. Clair Prison Theater Group, we'll say goodbye to Kyes Stevens and drive to Huntsville to talk with one of her ex-students. When Emily was released from prison in 2014, she adopted Huntsville, Alabama as her new home. Emily suggests meeting at the main park because it's a wide open space, a good contrast to her 16 years within the gray-white confines of Tutwiler Women's Prison.
This is a perfect place to meet, in the open.
There are no fences.
There's fresh air.
There are no guard shacks.
There's sunshine up above.
You can actually look out any window you want to or step outside and watch the sunrise or watch the sunset.
There's fountains, ducks, dogs.
And you can see the pup parade. The first day I got out, it was the day after Thanksgiving, and it was not really cold, so I spent about an hour just walking out on the deck and walking back in. The thing about being incarcerated, you're dehumanized. There's no room for personality. You're given a number that is you. I was 216100. It's really hard to gather your identity back. So when Kyes came in, the first class I took with was there in 2003. We were not a group of convicts. We were a class. We were individuals. It didn't matter that we were in white uniforms.
Did it affect your relationships with other students?
I had people who had their street cred in prison, who came across as the toughs, the bullies, the butches, whatever. And so they would come into class, and all of a sudden you see a totally different person. You see the creative person. You see the beautiful person that's buried underneath all this, the masks, the posturing. So, but the thing about it is there was the respect that whatever happened in class stayed in class. There were no boundaries. There were no races. But when you go back out on the hall, all those walls came right back up.
How do you see the art and the poetry teachers who come into prison to teach?
For an instructor who has no vested interest for real, there's no personal gain to go inside those gates. For them to step outside of their comfort zone, to come into a hostile environment, because that's exactly what it is. Inmates' correspondence, whether it's letters, phone calls, everything, all the communications from one side of the fence to the other are monitored. So even if you're talking to your mom or your child on the phone, these are recorded. So you can't really say what you really want to say.
And you're always conscious of this? Yes. You're always aware of this?
They make sure you're aware of it. So these instructors who come in, they are able to take the voices that they hear, the things that they see, and they are allowed to carry that out. We've had instructors who have came in who are like women's rights activists, feminists, that they take what they see and they hear, and they carry it to the world. So they're giving the inmates a voice.
There is an emergence of a subculture that emerged through the combined work of activists and artists dedicated to justice system issues. Poetry plays a large part in that, more so than ever with the emergence of social media and platforms like obviously Twitter and Facebook. That's sort of a catalyst for change as well.
WBAM. Well, I caught my wife with another man, and it cost me 99. On a prison farm in Georgia, close to the Florida line. Well, I've been here for 2 long years. I finally made the warden my friend.
I leave Huntsville to drive to the Appalachian Mountains to rest and sort out my thoughts about America. I imagine Kyes Stevens at her home organizing her program with her cat reclining in the far corners of a rustic house. It's around 10 at night, and my car feels like a minnow in the interstate sea of freight trucks heading north. I came to Alabama to pursue prison art culture. Now, while leaving, it seems to be pursuing me through the airwaves. First, this song about a prisoner, a warden, and a dog. And then the news.
Police charging 22-year-old Arrington McDowell. Detectives say he targeted co-eds walking alone at night near campus, using a gun to demand sex or money. McDowell is also charged with robberies at several businesses. He's being held on a $120,000 bond. New tornado sirens on the way to Jefferson County.
Was the young man brought to Elmore or one of the other prisons where Kyes Stevens teaches? Maybe next week at 8 in the morning, he'll find himself sitting with Henry, Andrew, and Coran, or guys like them, trying his best to scribble a few good words in a notebook before going back to his bunk. Here's Paul Brody. Thanks for listening to my feature, Most Wanted Poets. Editor, Leslie Rosin. Music, Paul Brody and Christoph Bernewitz. A production from WDR 2016.